1802, before there was medicine on that hill, before the scalpels and the charts, before the dead were tagged and wheeled beneath humming lights, there was a chapel. No name, no cornerstone, no ceremony. It rose from the fog like something that had always been waiting, its spire jutting into the mist west of Carrow's Hollow. They built it with purpose, or perhaps only out of compulsion. The bell tower was framed but never crowned. The bell never arrived. No congregation gathered. No priest was assigned. Yet as the first winter gnawed its way down the hill, villagers spoke of flickering light in the windows. Shadows moved behind frosted glass. Bare footprints, in December, trailed through the snow up to its warped front doors. None were seen returning. In 1834, the county tried to erase it. A demolition order was filed. But when workers arrived, they found the deed had been transferred. To whom, no one could say. The structure in every legal sense belonged to someone else now. It stood untouched, forgotten by ink, remembered by stone. And then, in 1874, St. Mercy General Hospital opened on that very hill. Its planners saw opportunity in the elevation, clean air, a view of the valley, isolation for the afflicted. They didn't ask about the chapel. They didn't know. Its foundation, dark granite, threaded with something redder than mortar, was never removed. The hospital rose directly atop it. Not a single brick disturbed. The blueprints called it pre-existing structure. Chapel, retained. Inherited, like a curse in a will. Over the next 14 years, 313 patients died within the hospital's walls, some of illness, some of silence, some of something else. The youngest was 6 days old. The oldest had no name, just the word found typed where a family should have been. At first, the deaths were recorded properly, tagged, charted, sent below to the cold drawers. But then, like rot in the walls, the records began vanishing. Names slipped off paper, files misfiled, dates erased. After the first 40, no one could account for the rest. Still the chapel stood, its narrow door warped yet never locked. The latch was repaired 7 times, and each morning it hung open again. No one ever saw it move. Dust never settled. One disappeared entirely. All that remained of him was his collar, and a torn page from Revelation, folded twice and weighed down with a small white pebble. Something had been here before St. Mercy, and whatever it was, it did not leave when they built over it. It simply waited, beneath the wards, behind the walls, behind the altar, always facing the wall. And when it began quietly, a ticking behind the surgical theater clock. A corridor built where none was planned. A boy in gray who never spoke and pointed only to the floor. St. Mercy was supposed to heal, but something else had inherited it first, and it had other intentions. On paper, St. Mercy General was a model of efficiency, symmetrical, clean, rational. 2 main halls, facing east and south, flanked the central ward like arms outstretched in welcome. Blueprints were signed, reviewed, stamped. County approved, sanctioned. But when the final brick was laid, something had changed. A 3rd corridor now jutted from the western side, long, narrow, unsanctioned. It had no listing in the contractor's receipts. No budget line, no permit. The materials used were different. Brick too dark for local kilns. Cement that smelled faintly of seawater and ash. The workers swore they never built it. When questioned, the foreman went pale and asked not to return. His crew agreed, saying nothing but shaking their heads when shown the blueprints. There were only 2 wings, they insisted. And yet the 3rd stood, cold, windowed, humming like something alive. The windows were the first thing noticed. They didn't open. Some weren't even windows at all, just painted panes over solid wall. When the morning sun hit them, they cast no shadow inside, only a dim, sickly hue. The wing was assigned to long-term patients. The weak, the unconscious, the hopeless. They deteriorated fast. Fevers bloomed without cause. Mouths slurred words that weren't theirs. Eyes stared too long at corners that should have been empty. Language faded. Then teeth. Then names. Nurses began refusing overnight duty. They spoke of sudden pressure in their heads. Of hymns playing where there were no speakers. Of waking up with scratches beneath their gowns. The West Wing grew quiet, and then it grew still. Eventually, administration shuttered it. The charts labeled it auxiliary storage, restricted, but even then things continued to vanish. Linen counts failed to balance. Bed sheets went missing, and sometimes in the hours before dawn they'd return, laid flat across the tiled floor soaked through, perfectly folded. No footprints, no hands seen, just damp cloth waiting. The morgue scale was next, always 3 pounds too heavy. They recalibrated it, replaced it. brought in a sealed, factory-fresh model from the city. Still, every corpse weighed 3 pounds more than the body chart predicted. Finally, one orderly began weighing the patients before death. The difference? Always 3 pounds. Exactly. He told his supervisor the hospital was keeping something. Said it plainly, without fear, then refused to return. 2 months later, he died. No wounds. No illness. Just collapse. As if something inside him had caved in, like a lung that never filled again. Like a soul that had been pried loose. New orderlies were told not to speak of the scale. The nurses said otherwise. They whispered a different truth. It doesn't weigh the dead. It weighs what stays behind. It's the weight of refusal. The weight of something that won't leave. And down the West Wing hallway, just behind, the chapel stood at the heart of St. Mercy like a tumor with stained glass. Not large. Not grand. Just stone, warped wood, and an air that never moved. Its door never locked. Not for lack of trying. Maintenance replaced the latch 5 times, each with newer parts, each swearing the fit was perfect. But by morning, the bolt always hung loose, twisted, not broken, almost as if it had been unlatched from within, and no one ever saw it open. Its interior was always as they left it, and yet never quite the same. Candlesticks never collected dust. No soot darkened the brass. Even when left unlit for weeks, the wicks stayed blackened, as if recently extinguished. The water in the font never stilled. Visitors said it rippled faintly, like something beneath was breathing upward. One nurse tested it with a match. The flame danced sideways, not from wind, but some invisible pull. 7 chaplains served in the first 5 years. 7. The hospital's board claimed turnover was expected. Illness, relocation, early retirement. But behind closed doors, each had left in quiet distress. Eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Speech slowing by the end. One simply stopped showing up. No resignation, no letter. His room, when checked, was cold. The windows shut. The bed untouched. On the nightstand, a torn page from Revelation, folded twice. Held down by a small white pebble, smoothed by river or time. Beside it, his collar neatly placed. He had vanished. Entirely. No records. No forwarding address. The archdiocese denied his assignment had ever been made. And yet the hymns continued. Even when the chapel sat unstaffed, locked from the outside. Voices were heard, low, tuneless, almost reversed. Patients housed nearby began murmuring in sleep, even those with no memory of church, even those raised without language at all. One woman, admitted after a fall down stone stairs, began reciting Latin rites backward, her voice clear, unwavering. She paused at the same phrase each time, lips quivering, like she was listening for an answer. She died 2 days before her release. Internal hemorrhage. No known cause. A nurse found her final message scrawled in pencil along the curve of a paper cup. He stands behind the altar now, but he faces the wall. After that, no one preached from the chapel again. It remained open, but no mass was held. No candle was lit in anyone's name. It became a room no one acknowledged. A gap in the hospital's spine, a presence too old for modern charts. They said if you stood in it too long, you'd start to feel your blood slow. Not cold, not afraid, just heavy, like someone else had remembered your name long before you were born. He arrived without a name. No guardian, no papers, no file in the county system. Just a boy, small, silent, swaddled in something the staff would remember for the rest of their lives. A hospital gown the color of whetstone, gray, but not like any issued by St. Mercy. The staff called him simply the boy in gray. Not out of cruelty, but because there was no other way to refer to him. He never spoke. Not a word. Never cried. Never laughed. He did not flinch when touched. He did not respond to questions. He only covered his ears when people talked near him, especially the chaplain. When asked where he'd come from, he pointed to the floor. Not to a doorway, not to his shoes. To the floorboards. His chart remained blank. Vitals, normal. But he ate almost nothing, drank only when watched. He didn't sleep so much as wait. Light bulbs near his room dimmed when he lay down. Even the new ones, straight from unopened boxes. One nurse fainted after adjusting his sheets. When revived, she whispered. I leaned in and I heard breathing. But it wasn't coming from him. It was underneath. The air around his bed always smelled faintly of rust and tide water. And soil. On his final day, something changed. The hallway filled with a sharp scent, like pennies, salt, and something older. Patients reported headaches. Orderlies refused to enter the eastern stairwell. And then he stood up. without struggle, without sound. He walked calmly down the hall, hands at his sides. No hesitation. He turned the corner and descended the eastern stairwell without a glance back. He was not seen again. All that remained was the gray gown, neatly folded at the top step. Dry, still warm. Security footage? Blank from that hour. No missing persons report ever matched his face. No child was listed in the area. No witness remembered his arrival. And the room he had used? It stayed vacant for 6 years, not by rule, but by quiet agreement. Whenever a new patient was assigned to it, they fell ill within hours. Unconscious by morning. One flatlined before being moved. Eventually, it was removed from circulation. The nurses began placing dried lavender at the doorway. Someone taped a cross above the lintel. Another drew a circle of salt along the threshold. Swept away each night. Redrawn each morning. The gray gown was placed in storage, but no one could remember where. Not the inventory clerk, not the records nurse. It had simply disappeared. Some say the boy in gray wasn't a patient at all. He didn't come to be healed. He came to see something, or to be seen. And when he was finished, he left the way only things beneath the floor know how to leave. In the surgical theater, where the living hovered close to the dying, where lungs were held open and hearts were coaxed back from the edge, a single clock kept time for the whole room. It was mounted above the observation glass, visible to surgeons, to students, to God if he were watching. And yet, no matter how often it was reset, it ran 7 minutes fast. Every day, exactly 7, they replaced the batteries, rewound it, swapped it with another. Still it crept forward, ticking slightly too quickly, as if counting down to something only it understood. At first no one noticed, but as the deaths began to rise, slow, then faster still, the surgical team began to worry. One anesthesiologist reported feeling faint during routine prep, said she heard someone whisper her name during a tracheotomy, but no one had spoken. A new surgeon, young, steady, confident, halted mid-procedure, scalpel trembling above exposed ribs. He claimed he saw something move in the observation glass. Not behind it, in it. Reflected backwards, wearing his hands but not his eyes. After that, he wouldn't enter the room again. Another incident followed. A power outage during a lung operation. The emergency generators kicked on. Everything blinked back except the clock. It glowed, pale green, bright as a beacon, ticking even without power. When the lights returned, it was 7 minutes ahead. Again, they pulled it down, opened the casing. Inside was no corrosion, no fault, but in the backplate, pressed into the brushed steel, was a deep indentation, like something had leaned hard into it from within. Not a crack, not a dent, a shape, wider at the top, tapered, like a forehead pressed to glass. They replaced it. The new clock ran on time for 2 days. Then it too began to shift, ticking faster, 1 second too many per hour, then 2, then 7 minutes, exactly. A pattern emerged. Every time someone died in that room, the clock advanced. Not by much, just seconds, but each death brought it closer to that fixed 7-minute gap. As if the space between the living and the dead was being measured. A nurse started logging the discrepancy in a small green notebook. It vanished after her 3rd entry. All that was found in her locker was a torn bandage, knotted, and a photograph of the surgical room taken in 1881. The photograph predated the clock, and yet there it was, mounted in the same place, the same shape, already running fast, if the angle of the shadows was to be believed. But the face reflected in the glass that day, it wasn't anyone in the room, it wasn't alive. Her name was Elise Marrow. She was known for her quiet presence, her steadiness under pressure, her habit of humming old lullabies under her breath as she made her rounds, songs no one could name. No radio ever played, she said her grandmother taught her. But her personnel file listed no family, no emergency contact, just her. She volunteered for the night shifts in the West Wing when no one else would. Not out of bravery. She simply said, "I don't dream when I'm there." She was the one who found the first linen folded on the floor, soaked and warm. She was the one who began writing down where they appeared, what time, what rooms, marking the corners of each square with chalk before collecting them. No matter where the sheet was found, the chalk mark was always gone. But Elise kept records, careful ones, tidy, methodical, until her notes abruptly stopped. The final entry was dated November 3rd, 1886. Just 3 words written twice. "It's behind me." That same night, She was observed on the chapel's balcony at 2:14 a.m. No one knew how she got inside. The door had been locked from both sides, chained even. But a patient in recovery swore he saw her silhouette in the chapel window, swaying slightly, as if listening to a distant hymn. By morning, she was gone. No resignation, no body, just the scent of lilac and salt water in her empty locker. But 2 days later, the chapel font overflowed. Not with water, with blood. Thin, pink, scentless. Tests were run. The results came back inconclusive. The substance was cleaned without ceremony. The font was sealed, yet her humming returned. Every night at 3:07 a.m., the hall just outside the chapel would fill with the faint strains of her song. Low, wordless, slow. The same lullaby, always from just around the corner. But no matter how quickly someone turned, no one was ever there. Patients began reporting a nurse in gray. Not the same shade as the boy's gown. Darker, dustier, like old ash. They described her as gentle, silent, hands cold as tile. She would stand by their beds, touching nothing, staring only at the ceiling, then vanish. One man, terminal, blind, half mad with fever, gasped as she approached and said, "That's not a nurse. That's the reason they built the chapel before the hospital." When asked to explain, he only laughed, and then bled from the ears. He died before morning. No one has been able to prove Elise ever left the hospital. But her personnel file reappeared in 1927, filed under current staff, unaged, untouched. A fresh photo was clipped inside. In it, she's smiling, but there's no reflection in her eyes, just a faint smudge, like a thumbprint or a face pressed against glass from the other side. It began in the East Wing, room 203, a recovery suite quiet, rarely occupied. The mirror above the sink was found fogged one morning, though the room had been locked and unused, and there in the misted glass was a single word: mercy. At first it seemed like coincidence, condensation patterns, trick of the eye, but the next morning it appeared again, clearer this time, etched not in steam, but in the glass itself. A shallow carve, precise and thin, like from a fingernail. The mirror was replaced. The new one remained blank for 3 nights. Then, on the 4th, the word returned, deeper this time, more urgent. Mercy. No other message. No hand ever seen. Just the word. Over and over. Soon it spread. Mirrors across the hospital began showing signs. Bathrooms. Operating prep rooms. Even the chapel's brass plate, long tarnished and untouched, began to shimmer with letters when fogged. Not always visible to the naked eye, but always felt by those who passed them. Staff reported unease, like being watched through glass. Not reflections. Something behind them. One intern attempted to film the phenomenon. He left his camera running in the radiology washroom overnight. When he reviewed the footage, it was almost entirely black, except for the last 4 minutes. The mirror fogged slowly, though the room remained cold. Then a face emerged. Not his, not human. Long, gray-skinned, slack-jawed. Its eyes were wrong, reflective like mirrors themselves, but deeper, like holes punched into the surface of the world. When the frame cleared, the camera shut off. The battery had been fully charged. The footage was erased the next day. Not by him, by someone in records, though no one could say who. Soon after, a patient in intensive care began scratching at the mirror in her room. With her IV needle, she was blind, both eyes removed in a prior surgery. But every morning, the staff found the same word gouged into the glass above her sink. Mercy. Sometimes backward, sometimes upside down, always perfect, as if traced from memory. When asked why she did it, she said, "It keeps calling for its name." It was never named properly. That's why it stayed. She died on her 7th night in the ward, the mirror in her room shattered from the inside. Glass embedded in the wall opposite, but no fragments found on the floor. Later, a nurse from archives discovered something peculiar. In the original 1802 chapel blueprints, the word mercy was nowhere. No sign, no plaque, no dedication. It had no name. It was built without blessing, without title. But now, every reflective surface in the hospital was calling it by one, as if something inside was demanding to be acknowledged. Not for peace, but for permanence. There were no speakers in the stairwells, no radios in the walls, and yet staff began to hear voices that weren't theirs, traveling through the air like secrets bleeding from the brick. It started as faint murmurs, barely audible, a hush just outside the edge of sense. But those who paused to listen always heard the same thing. A woman's voice whispering a name, never theirs. never familiar, and always from the floor above. You'd look up, nothing there, no footfalls, no movement, just silence. But the whisper would continue, dragging itself downward, floor by floor, until it passed through you. Some described it as a chill, others as pressure. One nurse said it felt like a hand brushing the back of her throat from the inside. The hospital conducted a full systems check. No faulty wiring, no intercom crosstalk, no audio equipment misfiring. Still, the voice persisted. One internist began to map the phenomena. He kept a log of when and where the whisper moved. He discovered a pattern. It always began at 4:11 a.m., originating from the 7th floor, moving steadily down, 1 floor every minute, until it reached the basement. Always 7 floors, always 7 minutes, and always 7 syllables. Sometimes a full name, sometimes a sentence, sometimes a single word repeated. She was not alone. Do you remember me? He's still in the wall. Anna, 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 Anna. Those who heard their own names reported nausea. 2 were found unresponsive. 1 tried to pull her own ears out. She survived, but never spoke again. She only wrote in trembling script, "It gets louder when I answer." The stairwell was closed at night. Signs were posted. Lights were left on. But the voice traveled anyway, not bound by door or distance or decision. A janitor on sublevel 3 followed the sound once. He carried a lantern, old habit from a prior job in the mines. He never returned. They found the lantern at the base of the old east elevator shaft, unlit, dented, still warm. No sign of him. Not then, not ever. But the next night the whisper changed. It said his name, all 7 syllables, drawn out, loving. Jonathan Levi Merritt. Come down. The next morning, every bulb on sublevel 3 had burned out. Even the emergency backups, even the ones sealed inside reinforced casing, and on the wall outside the shaft, drawn in ash or mold or something wetter, were the outlines of 2 ears. Long, narrow, listening. St. Mercy was not built for healing. It was built to contain a conversation that never should have started. And now it was responding. In 1802, before there was medicine on that hill, before the scalpels and the charts, before the dead were tagged and wheeled beneath humming lights, there was a chapel. No name, no cornerstone, no ceremony. It rose from the fog like something that had always been waiting. Its spire jutting into the mist west of Carrow's Hollow. They built it with purpose, or perhaps only out of compulsion. The bell tower was framed but never crowned. The bell never arrived. No congregation gathered. No priest was assigned. Yet as the first winter gnawed its way down the hill, villagers spoke of flickering light in the windows. Shadows moved behind frosted glass. Bare footprints, in December, trailed through the snow up to its warped front doors. None were seen returning. In 1834, the county tried to erase it. A demolition order was filed. But when workers arrived, they found the deed had been transferred. To whom, no one could say. The structure, in every legal sense, belonged to someone else now. It stood untouched, forgotten by ink, remembered by stone. And then, in 1874, St. Mercy General Hospital opened on that very hill. Its planners saw opportunity in the elevation, clean air, a view of the valley, isolation for the afflicted. They didn't ask about the chapel. They didn't know. Its foundation, dark granite, threaded with something redder than mortar, was never removed. The hospital rose directly atop it. Not a single brick disturbed. The blueprints called it pre-existing structure, chapel, retained. Inherited, like a curse in a will. Over the next 14 years, 313 patients died within the hospital's walls, some of illness, some of silence, some of something else. The youngest was 6 days old. The oldest had no name, just the word found typed where a family should have been. At first, the deaths were recorded properly, tagged, charted, sent below to the cold drawers. But then, like rot in the walls, the records began vanishing. Names slipped off paper, files misfiled, dates erased. After the first 40, no one could account for the rest. Still the chapel stood, its narrow door warped yet never locked. The latch was repaired 7 times, and each morning it hung open again. No one ever saw it move. Dust never settled. One disappeared entirely. All that remained of him was his collar, and a torn page from Revelation, folded twice and weighed down with a small white pebble. Something had been here before St. Mercy, and whatever it was, it did not leave when they built over it. It simply waited, beneath the wards, behind the walls, behind the altar, always facing the wall. And when it began quietly, a ticking behind the surgical theater clock. A corridor built where none was planned. A boy in gray who never spoke and pointed only to the floor. St. Mercy was supposed to heal, but something else had inherited it first, and it had other intentions.